Hello students, this video is meant to supplement your Essay 4 assignment and give you some thoughts about how to do this assignment. This video assumes you've already read the assignment instructions. If you haven't done so, please read them. I'm not going to summarize them here. I assume you've already read it. All right, as you know, you first need to choose a news story. You're going to close read that news story. So let me just say a word about what you're doing when you're close reading a news story. So this is an article that could work well for your assignment. So let me read a few key parts of the article so we're on the same page. Jenna Ryan, a Donald Trump enthusiast who tweeted that she's definitely not going to jail after she stormed the Capitol on January 6th, was sentenced to 60 days in prison on Thursday. U.S. District Judge Christopher Cooper said Ryan, a Texas real estate agent who flew to D.C. on a private plane and promoted her business as she live streamed in the Capitol, played a, quote, lesser role in the criminal conduct that took place, unquote, than many others did. You're not being singled out for your political views or anything like that, Cooper said. It's how and where you decided to express them. In a letter to Judge Cooper, Ryan sought to downplay her actions that day. So I would close read this article by looking for a couple of things. One is what can I make of what has been quoted and what's been selected, the facts that have been selected to share here by the reporter. Is there any tone or sort of slant to the commentary, right? Now, for example, in this one sentence paragraph that transitions to another part of the interview, the writer says in a letter, Ryan sought to downplay her actions that day. Now, journalists are expected to be relatively neutral in their reporting, but selecting words, diction does create tone, and the tone can be negative or positive. Small changes in words has an effect. It pushes our reaction negatively or positively. So the writer of this article says that Ryan sought to downplay her actions. She could have chosen a different word, defend her actions or something like that. So that's an example of a word I might focus on in my close reading, that the reporter is giving a slight negative slant to this story. Another thing we might go through and analyze a few more things. But actually what I want to do now is I want to show you, I think an interesting tool and something you'll be doing in the essay is comparing how the story that you're analyzing looks different from how it's been reported in other news sites. So just for context, I've linked to the media bias chart in your assignment. And you can use this to sort of see where your news site sources are plotted along the different parts of the chart. So we have political bias is left and right, which makes sense. And then more and less reliable is the vertical axis. So HuffPost, you might notice, is actually fairly, it's definitely on the left side, right? So that's helpful to keep in mind. I'm probably expecting a more of a negative slant on the story about Ryan because she was a protester and a Trump supporter. So a left bias would make sense. Well, let's compare how that story is reported to a source maybe more to the center or right. So here's the way The Hill reports the story. And let's look at the differences for a minute. So anyway, here's The Hill's report. A Capitol rioter who said she was definitely not going to jail was sentenced to prison on Thursday. Jenna Ryan of Frisco, Texas, was sentenced to 2 months in prison for her participation in the riots, the Washington Post reported. Let's skip down and read this section here. Definitely not going to jail, Ryan tweeted at the time. Sorry I have blonde hair, white skin, a great job, a great future, and I'm not going to jail. Sorry to rain on your hater parade. I did nothing wrong. Referencing the tweet, U.S. District Judge Christopher Cooper said Thursday that he had sentenced Ryan as he did because of her apparent lack of remorse from that day, the Post reported. You've been very upfront that you feel no sense of shame or guilt, Cooper said. You've suggested Antifa was somehow involved, and perhaps most famously you said that because you had blonde hair and white skin, you wouldn't be going to jail. Okay, so this is interesting because look at how now The Hill, we said, was a more center to slightly right-leaning news site. So we would expect, unlike the HuffPost article, this one to be more sympathetic to Ryan, possibly, at least not to make her look as bad or as ridiculous as the HuffPost article might be trying to make her. That would be what we would expect. Now, how might this article be doing that? Well, look at, for instance, the way the judge, what is quoted from the judge and how that's sort of presented here. In the Hill article, the judge says that he sentenced Ryan as he did because of her apparent lack of remorse. And then the quote was immediately follows is, and then he's going to explain it. That's the implicit relationship here. And he says, you've been upfront with no shame or guilt. You suggested Antifa, and then famously your blonde hair and white skin comment. So it makes it sound like because she made these inflammatory comments, he's punishing her by giving her the sentence for her lack of remorse and for her inflammatory comments. Well, what did the HuffPost do with the judge quotes? Let's see. The way they presented the quotes from the judge was very different. Look at here, at the second paragraph here, it said, he acknowledges that she had a lesser role that took place that day, but that does not mean that you didn't have culpability in what happened. So a much more like rational, explanatory judge, right, kind of style of a judge here. I don't think you could have missed the fact that this was no peaceful protest. You were a cheerleader, you cheered it on. So the judge here is giving different reasons, a different rationale for why she needs to be convicted. And then, in fact, this is really interesting. In the HuffPost article, this quote is included, which explicitly states the judge he's saying, I'm not punishing you, I'm not singling you out for your political views. So this presentation of the way the judge spoke to her makes it sound like he was much more unbiased, it was less political, whereas the Hill one might be making it look like a little bit more political, just by the way they're selecting the quotes from the judges. So that is very interesting. You can see here, you wouldn't have seen this aspect of this article if we hadn't compared it to an article from a different part of the political spectrum in terms of the news site type that we were looking at. So doing that can help you see, oh wow, they deliberately selected quotes to get a certain effect on the reader to make the story look more or less favorable to the people in the story. Now, one more example, let's go to, so HuffPost is left. Let's go to a far left website, Raw Story, and see how they report the story. And you'll see here much more inflammatory language. A travesty, quote, MAGA rioter lashes out at the media after getting hit with prison sentence. And already you can see these more polarizing words, like the word lashes out at media has a negative sort of violent connotation. MAGA rioter Jenna Ryan lashed out at the media after she's received 60-day prison sentence. And so this article, I won't go through it, but if you were to compare it, you would see that she looks even less sympathetic and actually quite crazy and ridiculous in this article, as you'd expect, or you might not be surprised, with this news site being even more slanted towards the left. All right, so with that, we can see already some interesting ways to close read and analyze this article. And comparing it to other news sources. Just by Googling that same story, you might be able to find these or other similar sites and sort of compare it to other parts on the left-right spectrum to see how they treat it differently. Lastly, I'll just point out what you're looking at when you look at these news stories. You are looking at a fairly conventional genre of news reporting, and it looks basically like this. You're always going to have the who, what, when, where, and why of the story in what's called the lead at the very beginning, followed by important background information, followed by interviews and quotes, and finally wrapping up with if there's any analysis or commentary, it tends to be later in the article. So what this tells us is that you definitely will find interesting things to analyze early on in the lead, but you should find that the lead gives more of the factual reported information, and that should be fairly accurate. But where you will see differences is when you get into that body of the article, when you see the quotes, as we've just demonstrated, the quotes you select and the way you arrange those quotes, and the tone with which you present the manner of those quotes, that all has a lot to do with how the article plays in terms of its effect on the reader, what the reader is trying to get the reader to think. So just to wrap this up, what would you say about something like this in an essay for paper? You might say, well, this has demonstrates clear bias to make this person, Jenna Ryan, make the reader have a negative attitude towards her, to make her look culpable, maybe a little bit ridiculous. You can decide what the effect is supposed to be. And then you might go further and say, well, now, why would this news site want to make her look that way? If you are already a person who leans left politically, this story might reinforce your attitudes about people on the right, the kind of people who stormed the Capitol, and so on. And so something like that might work well. And of course, it goes without saying, this assignment does not require you to have a specific political position at all or to out your political position in any way. You're simply trying to analyze what the article is trying to do in its rhetoric, what effect it's trying to create in the reader. And you're using close reading tools and fact-checking tools and comparing tools to try to show that rhetorical design is in the article. Okay, good luck with your writing, and look forward to reading what you can do.